Steve Oshana, the executive director of Demand for Action, is our guest this afternoon. And Demand for Action is a global initiative which seeks protection for Assyrians, Chaldeans, and Syriacs, and other ethno-religious minorities in the Middle East. They came together in June 2014 from a dozen countries to pool their energy and resources into a unified international effort. Since then, they have been quoted over 3,000 times by international media and have been able to reach high-profile media outlets. Thank you, Steve, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So tonight is a pretty important evening in the Senate in Washington, D.C., because there's a resolution that is going to come under vote, apparently, regarding ISIS aggression toward Christians. Now, there's nothing that's overtly Christian-focused on your website that I can see, but this is of great importance to you because these Christians are specifically Assyrians, Chaldeans, and Syriacs. Is that correct?
Yes. So to clarify, the vote is actually in the House. There is a Senate version of this resolution that was introduced just a few months back. But the vote tonight on the House version, House Concurrent Resolution 75.
Okay.
Our advocacy is not only for Christians. We do advocate for Yazidis, other minorities who are persecuted by ISIS. In particular, I am Assyrian, and so we advocate on behalf of Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac Christians. But there are other Christians who are persecuted, Armenians, being one of those groups, Melkites in Syria as well. We have, Christians who are not necessarily Assyrian, who are also targets of persecution and victims of genocide. And so this bill, encompasses all those Christian groups, as well as Yazidis and others.
So what happens, what changes when you have a group of people that are being persecuted by ISIS and suddenly you have a resolution that labels that persecution as genocide? Who cares? Why? What does that change about the political climate and the possibility of getting those Christians help and protection just by having that term genocide applied to their plight?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things there. As far as who cares, I care, right? We care. Assyrian people, these are my people who are being persecuted, Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriacs, and others. So we care. And from when you're talking about, moral imperatives, the U.S. it is a moral imperative of the United States to recognize when genocide is taking place and to prevent these atrocities.
Well, I think we all care about the atrocity that's happening. That isn't the who cares part. The frustration for me when I was involved in politics in Georgia, resolutions were ultimately meaningless. They didn't have any teeth. They didn't actually change anything. So what I want to know is this resolution, this House Resolution 75, going to actually change something in terms of the political environment in which these Christians are fighting for their lives from ISIS?
Yes, I think it does, and so to answer that question, I really think we need to sort of look at the history of the use of the term genocide.
Okay.
At Demand for Action, we have a lot of great partners in Washington. One of them is Dr. Gregory Stanton from Genocide. He's the president of Genocide Watch, one of the world's most renowned scholars on this subject. He's done an abundance of research and has figured out through this research that when you use the term genocide versus a lesser term, the likelihood that there's going to be action is greatly increased. So, for example, he always uses the example of Rwanda. After the U.S. waited 3 months before they used the term genocide while the genocide was going on in Rwanda, and once they did use it, within weeks we saw more action to stop and prevent this from continuing. It was the same thing in Yugoslavia. So, when you use the term, there's a greater likelihood that there's going to be action. And the reason for that, I think, is that this is a word that plays on the collective moral consciousness, and it creates it creates a precedent for nations to be behooved to act. And for example, asylum, seeking refugee status, and such is a great example of that. when someone is seeking asylum, if they are a victim of genocide, and that is legally stated that they are a victim of genocide, it's very difficult to deny that asylum claim. Similar with humanitarian aid. When we're trying to get humanitarian aid, to our people on the ground, to our organizations on the ground, we have a much better likelihood of convincing global powers to more directly deliver that aid. One, they can show that these are victims of genocide. So, really, what it does is it has an amplifying effect. It amplifies the legislative efforts and the tangible efforts that are being undertaken, both in terms of asylum, in terms of humanitarian aid, but also in terms of security, local security. Arming and training and equipping indigenous populations like Assyrian, Chaldean, and Syriac Christians in our ancestral homeland to defend themselves from these atrocities. Dr. Stanton always says the best thing you can do, the easiest thing you can do to stop genocide is to arm the victims of genocide. And so that's something that we have sought to do through the National Defense Bill, and we were successful in amending that. And so this really just sort of amplifies those efforts and really, creates what I would say is a critical mass. And we've seen the shift in tone, the way the global community talks about it, since the EU passed a similar resolution a couple of months ago.
So we are talking right now to Steve Oshana, the Executive Director of Demand for Action. And in the House in Washington, D.C., H.R. 75 is under discussion, a resolution that would put the term genocide on the aggression ISIS has for Christians in the Middle East. And what Steve has been sharing with us is that by getting this term genocide to be used regarding this action, it makes asylum claims much easier for Christians and for those Middle Easterners that are being persecuted by ISIS. It also has an amplifying effect on tangible efforts in reaching out and arming these people with an ability to protect themselves from ISIS and bring a shift to the global conversation regarding these persecuted Middle Easterners. Is that correct, Steve?
Yeah, that sums it up probably more eloquently than I could have put it.
Steve, this is John. I just have a question for you. As you look at the political landscape going into this vote, do you see bipartisan support on this, or are you having trouble? What do you see?
We have absolutely, unequivocally bipartisan support on this. The sponsors of this resolution, the people who introduced it, were Congressman Fortenberry, a Republican from Nebraska, a wonderful statesman and a wonderful man, and Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, who also happens to be the only Assyrian member of Congress. And she's a very progressive member of Congress. We've seen, this issue is really a nonpartisan issue.
Right.
We've been very fortunate in the bipartisan support that we, receive on the issue, not just on this resolution, but on all, from appropriations to defense to other things. I was doing an interview for an article recently, and in this process, the journalist reached out to the White House and reached out to other allies of ours, like Senator Cruz, who is sort of on the opposite end of the White House in terms of the political spectrum. And she noted in our conversation afterwards that we were as welcomed by the White House as we were by someone like Senator Cruz, and I think that goes to show sort of how nonpartisan of an issue this is.
So do you,
this affects.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say this is an issue that affects everyone. This is perhaps the persecution of ISIS against Christians and Yazidis and others is in my opinion probably the biggest global challenge and the biggest test of our security and our morality as a people in the 21st century. And this is really the battle of our time. So I think everyone understands that the world needs to come together and deal with it. So we haven't had any partisan issues on this.
Tell me this. It seems like a no-brainer. No duh, this resolution's going to pass. But is there any concern on your part that you're not going to get the votes that you need?
We don't have that concern. Right now, the resolution has 210 co-sponsors. those are just co-sponsors. And these 217 votes that passed, it was voted out of committee. We had a few amendments that we put forward on it. So our organization wasn't involved in the actual writing of the resolution. We saw the day that it was introduced, and so we worked with Congressman Fortenberry and his staff to make a few amendments. One of them include the Assyrian and Chaldean Syriac name in there as a specific, as our indigenous suffering to reflect that. So it passed out of committee through a procedural tool called suspension of the rules. I'm getting my procedure mixed up here. So under suspension of the rules, so under suspension of the rules, you basically skip a lot of the floor debates, the amendments that come on the floor, and it's a fast track method,
right?
For legislation that doesn't have any, that's non-controversial. So
right.
We expect it to pass by unanimous consent, as it did out of committee. So it was put on the suspension calendar. So I can't imagine a scenario where we're going to run into opposition on this. I just don't see it.
So I was just curious. You have obviously we're going through the House, and then a similar bill will be introduced in the Senate. And I would feel like the Senate would be similar to the House in the way that it goes. But the big question mark to me is the White House. Do you feel like President Obama would support this because of it's strong language being used, and I think in the past he shied away from it.
Yes, that's the big, going to be the big challenge. So there are a few things there. We've been working with the administration for several months now, providing evidence, showing documentation on, and showing how this is systematically.
Hey, Steve, I'm going to have you hold off on answering that. Will you stay with us over the commercial break and come back on the other side with us? We are talking to Steve Oshana, who's the Executive Director of Demand for Action, and he is getting behind an effort to coin the persecution that Christians are experiencing in the Middle East by ISIS as genocide, because of the amplifying effect that has on efforts across the world to help Christians. We will be back in just a few minutes to continue our conversation with Steve.
Today's Christian Talk 1120 The Bridge. We're all about connection. Connection like a bridge to better relationships. Connection to information to improve your health, your finances, your knowledge of the world around you. Connection to today's top teachers and commentators. And most importantly, connection to the God who made you. Connect to The Bridge at 1120 a.m. or online at thebridge1120.com and get the connection. Today's Christian Talk 1120 The Bridge.
Northwest Imports and David Wastrick will service and maintain your German or premium Japanese car, BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Lexus, and Acura. For over 30 years, Northwest Imports Car Repair has been your trusted shop. They specialize in servicing and maintaining artfully made machines so you have fewer problems. Need your AC serviced? A detailed inspection report before leaving town? They know exactly what to look for to ensure that your car is running at maximum performance. Call today to schedule a routine maintenance, repair, or oil change. Northwest Imports Foreign Auto Repair is a family-owned business that treats you with honest and professional service. Northwest Imports is a shop you feel comfortable referring to your friends. Keep that machine tuned for optimal performance. Northwest Imports, nwimports.com. Call them now at 331-7372. They're on Palm Springs Road in Northwest Austin. nwimports.com. 331-7372. Northwest Imports. They love those German cars.
I'm Nick Soboleski, a Select Quote agent with a true story that could save you hundreds of dollars a year. A woman named Linda just called. Her husband, Ray, has a $300,000 group life insurance policy, but is changing jobs and can't take it with him. Well, I impartially shopped the highly rated term life insurance companies we represent and found Ray, who is 41 and takes medication to control his cholesterol, a 10-year, $500,000 policy for under $26 a month. That's almost twice the coverage for less than half of what he had paid. If SelectQuote hasn't shopped for your life insurance, you're probably paying too much.
For your free quote, call 1-800-423-4557. That's 1-800-423-4557. 1-800-423-4557. or go to SelectQuote.com. We shop. You save. Get full details on the example policy at SelectQuote.com/commercials. Your price can vary depending on your health, issuing company, and other factors not available in all states.
We've learned that even things you don't think about, like certain bottled waters, can actually be very acidic. Of course, the acid can certainly harm our teeth.
John McIntyre of Hutto Premier Dentistry.
So things like, of course, soda, coffee, tea, those things are very acidic. And over time, it puts a lot of wear on the teeth. And so there's things we can do to help a patient. We do fluoride treatments in the office. It's okay to enjoy soda, but there's a right way to do it and to balance it out and protect your teeth. Because, we all want to enjoy life.
Visit their website, HuttoPremierDentistry.com. HUTTO PremierDentistry.com.
Speaking of everything.
You don't know what a closer is, so I'll tell you real quickly. It's the guy that
I actually know,
but
do tell me.
No, you think it's that female detective on television. That's not what I'm talking about.
I don't have television.
It's the pitcher that you bring in the ninth inning, acting like you know what I'm talking about.
I do know what I'm talking about. I know about closers because they have to come in and make sure that there's no more points scored. And so they're going to knock you out every time. Is that what it is?
No,
points?
it's runs. But that's okay.
Runs.
No, it's fine. You bring them in the fourth quarter.
Speaking of everything, weekdays from 5 to 7 on today's Christian Talk, The Bridge.
It's Kay Summers. Time to look at the Bridge events calendar and find some fun things to do in the Austin area. It's Cajun time coming up April 23rd, the 21st annual Louisiana Swamp Thing and Crawfish Festival. We're talking over 5,000 pounds of crawfish to eat, but hey, if you don't want to eat any crawfish, there's lots of great music like Zydeco, brass bands, blues, and rock. Check them out at theroadwayevents.com. You can find more great events. Go to thebridge1120.com and click on the events tab.
It's time to get back to Speaking of Everything with Bob and Jenny. Connect with us on Facebook. From today's Christian Talk 1120, The Bridge.
So, Steve, thank you for coming back with us. We wanted to follow up with our last question about Obama's support for Christians in the Middle East and whether or not you really felt like he was giving you the support that you needed, if he was going to ensure that this resolution was going to come to fruition. And also, Obama has an enormous amount of power at his disposal in terms of protecting Christians from ISIS. And I feel like so far his track record has been pretty disappointing.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things there. I'll try to unpack that, your question. As far as, the resolution goes, so this is a sense of the House resolution. If the president had no sort of part in this, this quite frankly comes in spite of the fact that the president has yet to recognize this genocide. So it doesn't require a presidential signature or anything like that. We've been working with the administration for months, providing documentation and other things to sort of prove that this is a genocide. As his mandate comes up that they need to make a statement on it. So to sort of go back to last year, in an appropriations subcommittee bill, there was a provision in there that was included that requires the administration or the Secretary of State in this case to make a determination as to whether or not this is genocide. Deadline for that determination is March 17th. This vote is really pivotal in terms of its timing because it really puts the ball in the president's court at this point. At this point, the administration needs to make this determination by the 17th. We expect and would want them to, make the right decision that this is indeed a genocide. We've heard reports that that might not be the case, that they might be, recognizing genocide against Yazidis but not Christians. That's something that we've been working on. So we expect the president to do the right thing. As far as what they've done so far to help Christians and other minorities, I think everybody would agree that they haven't done enough. The administration has not done enough. That doesn't mean they haven't done anything, but, we're going on to our second year now where these folks have been displaced, where they've been living in refugee camps, away from their homes, kids have not been in school, without access to medicine and other things. That's completely unacceptable. As this crisis is a result of U.S. foreign policy and our invasion of Iraq in 2003 that created these circumstances. So we have absolutely a moral obligation to do more than that. That's something that I've communicated to the president personally. Last April, I was invited to the Easter prayer breakfast at the White House, and I had a chance to speak with the president. And I told them we are absolutely disappointed with the way that this has been managed. I don't think the support has been enough. I don't think it's been timely enough, and it hasn't been direct. It hasn't gone directly to our communities. We need support directly to our aid organizations. We need support directly to our security forces. And that, as far as we're concerned, that's not negotiable. That hasn't happened. And we're continuing to work with the administration, work with our friends in Congress, work with the UN and the EU to find solutions. But the short answer is absolutely not. The president has not done enough. That doesn't mean they haven't done anything, but we absolutely expect more out of this administration.
Steve, it's interesting to me as I've watched some of these things unfold over in the Middle East, and you start looking and watching some leaders of the world that you don't expect, for instance, like Putin, to be a little bit more aggressive in fighting ISIS, and there may be other reasons behind that. But I'm curious, as you guys are an international organization, if you've had any interaction at all with the Russians.
Not especially. Our political organizations, our political parties, naturally have some bilateral conversations there. We've, in Washington, I have conversation here and there with someone from, the Russian embassy or whatever it is. I, however, am, I'm an advocate in the United States. I'm a, United States citizen. My job is to lobby the U.S. government. I would behoove our brethren in Russia to advocate their government as well. But we certainly have welcomed some of the some support from wherever we can get it. Typically, wherever.
I'd imagine you're not too picky. Like, anybody who wants to help us, please do. You mentioned the invasion of Iraq in 2003 created a lot of the circumstances that have led to what we're currently faced with and what Christians in the Middle East are faced with. And, here in America, it seems like ISIS has largely left the spotlight in U.S. media. And it'd be interesting for me to hear from you in terms of where exactly did ISIS come from? And how is it that even though their aggression is still very great, the spotlight in the U.S. has just kind of shifted away from them to other things? Is it because we're all busy paying attention to Trump, or are there other reasons for this?
I think that's certainly part of the reason. Now, so ISIS is used to be what was Al Qaeda in Mesopotamia, so they're sort of an offshoot of Al Qaeda. It's effectively a branch that's sort of splintered from that. If it's any indication to sort of how brutal ISIS is, I always use the anecdote that these folks were so extreme that Al Qaeda didn't want them in Al Qaeda. Right? That's that's the level of brutality that we're talking about. That this was too extreme for Al Qaeda. The fact that we're not hearing about it more in the U.S., I think we are hearing about it. I think we're hearing about it, in a pretty consistent way. It's been something that's been inserted into the presidential campaign as well. Because one of the lead sponsors on the Senate resolution is Marco Rubio. Senator Clinton has come out and said this is a genocide. Senator Cruz has done the same. Senator Cruz has been one of our biggest allies on this issue. He did a great job for Christians in the Middle East. So it's not that we're not hearing about it. I think naturally, Donald Trump has dominated a lot of the headlines, for better or worse. I'm not going to state my opinion on that, but the national headlines are naturally going to be about the elections. However, this is something that is very so steadily in the media. We've been somewhat fortunate in the sense that there hasn't been a large-scale attack against a certain village or geographic area.
Right.
There was a bombing in Amishli a while back that drew some headlines, but it wasn't on the scale of like the invasion of Kabul or the invasion of Mosul or something like that. So, at this point, the U.S. sort of strategy, or the global strategy, is shifting from a defensive one to, at this point, a sort of liberation posture, right? We're looking at the beginning stages of the liberation of Mosul. Sinjar has now been liberated. The Khabur River Valley has been liberated by Syriac forces and others.
Right.
So, we're moving more towards that now. So I think, you're hearing a little bit less of it. But certainly the national tenor of our political discourse is in this cycle revolves around the election.
We're talking to Steve Oshana, who's the executive director of Demand for Action. Demand for Action is a global initiative, and it seeks to protect Assyrians, Chaldeans, Syriacs, and other ethno-religious minorities in the Middle East. And on your website, you talk about one of your objectives as being that of establishing a safe haven in the Nineveh Plains in Iraq. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And is there just an influx of Middle Eastern Christians that are is kind of the key word, let's get to Nineveh Plains and then we're going to be all right? Tell us more about that.
So the Nineveh Plains, traditionally has been the heartland, of the Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac people in Iraq in particular. It is the ancient capital of the capital of Nineveh. That was the capital of Assyria, of our
right.
Our empire. And so that has it has both a geographical significance. It has a historical significance to us. But historically, it has sort of been the safe place to go. When people were leaving the violence in Basra and Baghdad and other places, they were going to the Nineveh Plains, as we would say, Desh Nineveh, right? The plains of Nineveh. And so that's, that has historically been where they had gone. When ISIS invaded the plains in 2014, the plains were basically empty, completely empty, and all those people were displaced. So it has a significance in the sense that the people were going there for safety, and then they were driven out of there by ISIS. We're seeing this pattern of persecution that really is sort of centered around the Nineveh Plains. The fight for self-administration, for autonomy, for self-governance, right? Some kind of self-governance really revolves around the Nineveh Plains as well in Iraq. So the Iraqi Constitution, under two articles, Article 125 and Article 140, allow for the creation of separate provinces. And so there's been an effort ongoing for a decade now to create a new province in the Nineveh Plains for, Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac Christians, other minorities, to have some semblance of self-governance. It's a contested area. It's contested between the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan regional government.
Right.
They sort of both see it as part of their own area.
Okay. So is that going to get them kind of... I'm sorry. Is that going to... This sounds like, the state of Israel, they were under persecution in World War II, and then this niche was carved out, and they were stuck back in the state of Israel, and now it's just nonstop violence in maintaining their territory. Is this what's going to happen to these Christians that, if they finally get their self-governance in the Nineveh Plains, it's just going to be a constant war to maintain it?
I hope not. I mean, look, so, I'll preface this by saying, I'm a student of Zionism. I very much sort of see a lot of the Assyrian struggle as the same as I saw the struggle, as it was sort of theorized in Zionism. And the early Zionists knew that, they were going to have to consistently defend this land. I think from that perspective, when we see Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac, Yazidis, and others forming these security forces who are now still in their sort of infancy, but who we expect, and we encourage and are trying to support the growth of, I think, the reality going forward is going to be the same for our people as it was for others, in that, self-security is going to be the number one priority for our people going forward in those lands, because that's the first line of defense. And,
right.
We have a history of it. It's not that the Syrians are a Christian people and have generally been very peaceful. However, there have been instances in the past with the Assyrian levies, with the 2,000-person militia that the Assyrian Democratic Movement had prior to the 2003 invasion. So we do have a history of defending our land, and I think that's going to unfortunately be
kind of the theme going forward.
Our future going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Steve Oshana, Executive Director of Demand for Action, for being with us today. I know it's going to go well with H.R. 75, the resolution to term the persecution of Christian Middle Easterners by ISIS as genocide. Thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.